Most people know the story of Noah's Ark, a man chosen by God to save his family and the animals from a world-ending flood. It's taught as a story of obedience, faith, and survival. But buried in this ancient account is a darker, often overlooked detail. There was one type of creature that God refused to save. They weren't animals. They weren't fully human. They were something else entirely. Beings so dangerous, so corrupted, that God made sure they wouldn't set foot on the ark. These beings were called the Nephilim. This is the hidden side of the flood story, the part about the creatures that were not allowed to enter, and the terrifying reason why. The story of Noah's Ark is often told as a tale of survival, faith, and divine rescue. A man, righteous in the eyes of God, is chosen to build a massive ark to preserve life during the greatest flood the earth has ever known. Animals entered 2 by 2. Noah's family was saved, and the world was given a new beginning. But hidden in this story is a darker thread, one that many overlook. There was one type of creature that God specifically did not allow to enter the ark. They were the Nephilim, the rise of the Nephilim. To understand why the Nephilim were excluded, we have to go back to the early days of Genesis. Chapter 6 of the Bible opens with a strange and unsettling passage. The sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Genesis 6. These sons of God weren't ordinary men. According to many biblical interpretations, especially ancient Jewish traditions and early Christian writings, they were rebellious angels who left their heavenly realm, took on human form, and took human women as their wives. The children born of these unnatural unions were not normal. They were giants, warriors, powerful beings described as heroes of old, men of renown, Genesis 6:4. But they were also something else, corrupt, dangerous, wicked. The name given to these beings was Nephilim, a word that can be translated as fallen ones or giants. They were hybrid creatures, not fully divine, not fully human, something in between. And they filled the earth with violence. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth. Genesis 6:5-6. The influence of the Nephilim was spreading fast. They weren't just physically powerful, they were morally destructive. They led mankind into chaos, war, and depravity. Their presence on earth was a major factor in God's decision to bring about the flood. God's judgment. God decided to wipe the slate clean, but he would preserve the pure parts of his creation, the animals, and one family that had not been corrupted by the Nephilim's influence. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Genesis 6:8. Noah was different. In a world gone mad, he chose to walk a path of righteousness. For 120 years he built the ark under God's command, a floating sanctuary for life. All the while, the Nephilim were watching. They saw this enormous vessel taking shape. They may have laughed, mocked, or even tried to stop him. But when the rains came, everything changed. The ark closes. God gave a clear instruction. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives were to enter the ark. Alongside them, a male and female of every kind of animal was to be brought aboard. But not the Nephilim. They were excluded. They had corrupted the earth. They were part of the rebellion that had driven God to this point. They had no place in the new world God was preparing. And so, at the moment of decision, God made it final. Then the Lord shut him in. Genesis 7:16. God himself closed the door of the ark. Once it was shut, it couldn't be opened. No one else could enter. Not even the mighty Nephilim. The flood, the waters rose. Rain fell from the sky, and the fountains of the deep burst open. Every mountain, every hill, every tree was submerged. All living things outside the ark died. Genesis 7:23 is blunt. Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out. Only Noah was left, and those with him in the ark. That included the Nephilim, the giants, the warriors, the violent hybrids. They were all swept away in the flood. God's judgment was complete. Evil had been purged. Did the Nephilim survive? Some have speculated that the Nephilim may have found a way to survive. After all, they appear again later in the Bible. In Numbers 13:33, when the Israelite spies report, "We saw the Nephilim there. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." But this raises questions. Did the Nephilim really survive the flood, or were the spies exaggerating out of fear? Many scholars believe that by the time of Moses, the term Nephilim had become a symbol, a label for any frightening giant or fierce warrior. The spies were terrified, and in their panic, they may have used the name to describe the giant tribes of Canaan, like the Rephaim or Anakim. Meanwhile, only 2 of the 12 spies, Joshua and Caleb, held on to faith. The others spread fear, and that fear cost an entire generation their chance to enter the promised land. God sentenced them to wander the desert for 40 years, a warning and a hope. So why was the Nephilim not allowed on the ark? Because they were a product of rebellion, a perversion of creation. They were a warning of what happens when boundaries are broken and evil is allowed to grow unchecked. But this story isn't just about destruction, it's about salvation. It's about the power of one person's faith to change the course of history. Noah wasn't perfect, but he was faithful, and in a world full of corruption, that was enough. The story of the Nephilim is more than just an ancient mystery. It's a warning, a reminder of what happens when power is misused, when boundaries are broken, and when evil is allowed to spread unchecked. The flood wasn't just about water washing over the earth. It was about a reset, a cleansing of corruption that had spiraled out of control. But it's also a story of hope. Noah wasn't spared because he was perfect. He was spared because he walked with God when no one else did. In a world full of chaos, one man's faith made all the difference. The Nephilim didn't make it onto the ark, but the lesson they left behind did. So as we remember the flood, we should also remember this. In the end, righteousness survives, evil is judged, and God always provides a way forward for those willing to follow Him.